All right, thank you, Matt. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you are. So as Matt explained, today's session, it's designed to help you understand a key multiple award schedule flexibility known as the order level materials or OLMs. So today's session, we're going to cover what OLMs are, their usage rules, responsibilities, and then we're going to give some practical examples to help you confidently apply them in the MAS program. So before diving in, we're going to take a look at why OLMs were created and the problems they solve. So why were OLMs needed in the first place? So contractors can often provide the primary products or services under their MAS contracts, but also may need incidental supporting items such as specialized materials, software licenses, shipping, or installation. And those items are not awarded on the schedule contract. So historically, obtaining these supporting items often required separate procurement actions and contract modifications or other acquisition approaches, which increased administrative effort and extending procurement timelines. So today with OLMs, they were introduced to provide greater flexibility within the MAS program. It allows agencies to acquire qualifying ancillary supplies as well as services as part of a single schedule order. And this results in a more complete solution and more streamlined acquisition process. So as we discuss the guidelines today, keeping this purpose in mind will make the OLM rules and responsibilities much easier to understand. So now that we know why OLMs were introduced, let's define exactly what they are. So an order level material is an unawarded product or service necessary to successfully perform a specific MAS contract order. And then with the recent updates to the MAS ordering procedures, we have the open market items, which remove previous guidance to streamline the process. Refresh 31, we expanded OLM. So the expansion of OLM originally was by specific subcategories. I think the number was 61. So now every subcategory in SIN is allowed to have the OLM SIN added. And then again, that greater flexibility, it allows for acquiring supporting products and services with increased speed. Again, so going into what is an OLM, it's an unawarded product or service necessary to successfully perform a specific MAS contract order. Rather than expanding a contract with new capabilities, OLMs offer the flexibility to include these items for a complete customer solution. Because OLMs are established at the order level, they're not pre-priced by GSA, but are instead evaluated and priced at the order level within each individual order. And again, throughout the presentation, we're going to think of OLMs as supporting the overall solution. Their purpose is to help complete the work, not to become it. So what makes an OLM different? So it's helpful to compare with it to something you're already familiar with. So your MAS contract itself. The products and services awarded on your MAS contract, right? They have already gone through GSA's evaluation process. They've been determined to be within the scope of your contract. Your pricing has been established, and those offerings remain available throughout the life of the contract unless they're modified or removed. So OLMs work differently. They're not added to your MAS contract. They're added to, again, a specific order because they're needed to successfully perform that particular requirement. Once the order is complete, those OLMs don't suddenly become part of your awarded contract. So the pricing is another important distinction. Since OLMs aren't pre-priced under the MAS contract, the order contracting officer evaluates that pricing as part of that individual acquisition. And we'll go into that a little bit more detail about the pricing responsibilities a little later. But again, that's still helpful to recognize that difference now. We also want to point out that the last row of this comparison, because it's really the guiding principle behind OLMs. Your mass contract, it contains the core products and services that your company offers, but OLMs simply support, again, they simply support those offerings. So you want to keep those distinctions in mind to make it much easier to recognize when OLMs are appropriate and, just as importantly, when they aren't. All right, we're going to give a common example of OLMs. So one of the easiest ways to understand OLMs is by looking at the types of products and services that commonly qualify. So on the product side, imagine a contractor performing an IT modernization project. They may need specialized cables, mounting hardware, software licenses, or any other materials relevant to that buy that weren't awarded to their mass contract, but again, are necessary to complete the installation. So those kinds of supporting products may qualify as order level materials when all of the applicable requirements are met. Again, OLMs can include services. So some examples might include installation support, site preparation, customized training, specialized repairs, or subcontracted services that fall outside the contractor's awarded labor categories, but again, are necessary to successfully perform the order. You also have shipping and freight. They may also qualify in certain situations, particularly for products shipped FOB origin. Later on, we're going to briefly visit shipping in the presentation because there are a few additional considerations to keep in mind. But as you're looking at these examples, we encourage you not to memorize the individual items. Instead, again, think about the common thread that connect all of them. So none of these are like products or services are the reason the government issued the order. They're simply helping the contractor deliver the overall solution. All right, so when OLMs cannot be used. So again, you're going to notice a common theme running through everything that we're discussing right now, that OLMs provide flexibility, but they aren't intended to replace the foundation of, the items awarded on your mass contract. So OLMs can't become the primary purpose of the order. If the government, if their main objective is to acquire, products or services being proposed as OLMs, then the OLM authority isn't the appropriate vehicle. Another important limitation involves your existing mass contracts. So again, OLMs aren't intended to replace products or services that you've already been awarded. If an item is available under your contract or properly belongs under another awarded SIN, such as the ancillary SIN, it shouldn't simply be treated as an OLM. And finally, agencies can't issue an order whose entire purpose is acquiring OLMs. Remember, these materials and services exist to support the performance of the primary requirement, not become the acquisition itself. So going over the primary purpose rule. So the primary purpose rule is really the guiding principle behind the use of OLMs. So there are several requirements associated with OLMs, and almost all of them come back to the single idea that they're intended to support performance of the order. They exist to help the contractor successfully deliver the products and services the government actually set out to acquire. So if you think about an agency issuing an order for cybersecurity services, the government's objective is to obtain the cybersecurity expertise. So along the way, you as the contractor might need software licenses or specialized equipment, training materials. Those supporting items may qualify as OLMs because they're helping deliver the primary requirement. Now, if you reverse that situation, suppose like the government's real objective is purchasing the software licenses or the cybersecurity services, and they become a relatively minor part of the order. At that point, the OLMs have effectively become the acquisition itself, which is not what the OLM authority was designed to accomplish. So it's simple. It's a simple question, but it's in a useful way to evaluate whether the OLMs are being used as intended. So at this point, we covered the why behind OLMs, and now we're going to turn our attention to the practical side. So what needs to happen before OLMs can actually be included in a mass order? So the first requirement is that the contractor must have the OLM SIN awarded on their mass contract. So not every contract has been updated to include the OLM authority. We allowed for that with refresh 32. Everyone was given the opportunity for existing contractors to opt in to accept the OLM mass mod, which is A815. And again, this is optional. It's not mandatory to add this to your contract. For new awarded contracts, you're automatically given that mass mod A815. And again, it's optional to add this to your mass contract, but we highly recommend it now with the RFO changes and the expansion of OLM and the removal of commercial items from the FAR. So second, you want to remember that OLMs exist only at the order level. They're not being added to your scheduled contract. They don't become permanent offerings under your contract. And again, they're not awarded. Third, OLMs need to be clearly identified within the order. So transparency is important because everyone involved, the contractor, ordering activity, and any future reviewers should be able to distinguish the OLMs from the contractor's awarded mass items. For this one, so pricing must be evaluated. So it's evaluated at the order level. Again, unlike products and services already awarded under your contract, the OLM pricing is not established by GSA. It's established by the ordering contracting officer, and they're responsible for determining that the proposed pricing is fair and reasonable. And then, again, the running theme, just want to stress it here, that OLMs must support the primary requirement. Every other requirement really builds on that one principle. And again, we have all this information on gsa.gov. This is in a checklist as well. And we have that on this at the end as a resource where you can look at this information. So one of the most common questions we get is who determines the pricing for the OLMs? Again, when your mass contract is awarded, GSA evaluates the pricing for the products and services. Those items are established at the contract level, and here OLMs are different. So they're not awarded or priced as part of your mass contract. There isn't any pre-established pricing for the ordering agency to rely on. So each order is unique, and the OLM supporting one acquisition may be very different from those supporting another. So that's why pricing is evaluated at the order level. It's also important to recognize that this doesn't mean OLM pricing is arbitrary or negotiated without oversight. It just reflects that the fact that these items haven't already gone through the mass contract pricing process. So again, you want to understand this distinction because it will help explain why pricing responsibilities are divided the way they are. And OLMs do require their own separate evaluation. All right, so now that we established what an order level material is and the requirements for using one, the next logical question is where those supporting products and services actually come from. So there's several potential sources available depending on the nature of the requirement and the applicable acquisition rules. So one option, and we'll spend a little time discussing this one, is obtaining those supporting products and services from another mass contractor. So that is another mass flexibility that was introduced with the revolutionary FAR overhaul. So another mass contractor provides an opportunity to leverage existing scheduled contracts while remaining within the mass program. In some situations, contractors may also obtain OLMs from government sources when authorized and applicable under the federal acquisition requirements. Finally, you have commercial sources remain an option when appropriate after applicable source priorities have been considered. So again, you just want to recognize that OLMs provide the flexibility in how contractors can complete solutions while still operating within an established acquisition framework. So again, yeah, use of mass contractors. We're going to go into a little bit of this. So it might sound unusual when you think about it, the use of another mass contract. But again, no single contractor can reasonably be expected to offer every product or service that might be needed to support every customer requirement. So the updated ordering procedures recognize that another mass contractor may already offer exactly what's needed. And by leveraging another mass contract, you can build more complete solutions while remaining within the mass program. So since those products and services are already available through an awarded mass contract, this approach can simplify the acquisition and again, reduce the need for separate procurement actions. So it's important to remember that this flexibility doesn't eliminate the contractor's responsibility to follow the applicable ordering procedures or comply with the requirements established by the ordering activity. Instead, it provides another tool for delivering the best overall solution to the customer. You can think of it as like expanding your toolkit. So like rather than being limited solely to the products and services on your own contract, you now have greater flexibility to leverage the strengths of other mass contractors when appropriate. Again, this is just another mass flexibility. It benefits everyone involved. Contractors gain additional options for meeting customer requirements. Agencies receive more complete solutions, and acquisitions remain within the established mass framework. So as we discussed, using another mass contractor can be an effective way to deliver, again, another complete solution. But it does come with a few important responsibilities. So always follow the requirements established by the ordering activity. Again, every solicitation is different, and agencies may include specific instructions or restrictions regarding the use of LLMs or supporting products and services. So you just want to make sure those requirements should always guide your approach. So documentation is equally important. You want to maintain records that support how products or services were obtained, that demonstrate compliance with applicable ordering procedures, and support pricing and awarded decisions when appropriate. This not only supports compliance, but it also helps answer questions later if the acquisition is reviewed. Another point that often generates questions involves the industrial funding fee, or as the acronym IF. So when a mass contractor purchases products or services from another mass contractor to fulfill a customer order, you want to make sure the IF is only paid once. This helps avoid duplicate reporting and ensures the transaction is handled correctly within the mass program. And then you want to remember, again, flexibility exists within the mass framework, but using another mass contractor isn't another way around like following the acquisition's requirements. It's just rather to meet customer requirements while remaining within the structure and protections already built into the program. So we're going to give you a practical example here. So imagine an agency needs a contractor to deliver a complex instructor-led cybersecurity training program. The primary requirement is the training itself, but the contractor also needs several supporting items to successfully perform the work. So temporary software licenses and pre-configured training laptops and classified exercise materials. So 3 contractors submit quotes. The first proposes only products and services already on its mass contract. The second proposes a complete solution that includes several order level materials. And the third offers the lowest price, but proposes obtaining certain supporting equipment through the open market. So before we talk through the answers, we're just going to encourage everyone to think about what we've covered today on what OLMs are, how they should be used. And we're going to see which quote appears to align with the updated ordering procedures. Which one raises concerns, and perhaps most importantly, is the lowest price quote automatically the one that should receive the award? So let's walk through each one. So quote one is certainly acceptable simply because it stays entirely within the contractor's awarded mass contract, and there's nothing inherently wrong with this approach. Quote two is also a strong option. The contractor is using the OLMs appropriately to support the primary requirement, allowing the customer to receive a more complete solution through a single acquisition. And again, assuming all of the applicable OLM requirements are met, including fair and reasonable pricing and compliance with the mass ordering procedures, this quote may also be considered. And then we have quote three. Even though it offers the lowest price, it relies on open market items where today's OLM flexibilities are intended to provide a compliant alternative. So as we discussed earlier in today's session, the updated ordering procedures, they encourage agencies and contractors to leverage OLMs and existing mass solutions whenever appropriate, rather than reverting to open market purchases. And again, notice that we never selected the quote based solely on price. So the objective remains identifying the best value solution, not automatically the lowest price one. Again, that's an important distinction because it reinforces many of the concepts that we discussed throughout today's presentation. So as we wrap up today's session, we would like to leave you with 5 ideas that summarize everything we discussed. So first, remember that OLMs support the solution. They aren't the solution themselves. If you keep the primary purpose rule in mind, many of the other requirements become much easier to understand. Second, OLMs exist only at the order level. They're identified for a specific customer requirement, and they don't become permanent additions to your mass contract. Third, contractors must have the OLM SIN awarded on their mass contract before they can provide any order level materials. So that's probably one of the first things you should verify whenever you're considering the use of OLMs. Again, you want to remember that OLM pricing it's not established through the mass contract award process. Instead, the order and contracting officer is responsible for determining that pricing fair and reasonable as part of the individual order. And finally, so the purpose of the OLMs isn't simply to add another acquisition tool. The real value is helping contractors and agencies work together to deliver complete mission-focused solutions, again, while remaining within the mass framework. So if you leave today's presentation remembering these 5 ideas, you'll have a solid foundation for recognizing when OLMs are appropriate and how they fit into the broader multiple award schedule programs. So I know I mentioned this earlier about the resources. So again, with any acquisition topic, there's always going to be unique situations and questions that arise. We do have a variety of resources. GSA.gov has the most up-to-date RFO changes, and it's linked here. We have the mass order flexibilities page, which includes OLMs, use of another mass contractor, as well as other RFO changes related to the mass flexibilities. There's also OLM guidance. There's a vendor support center link, which has frequently asked questions that we update, we update as new questions come through. And if we think it's useful for the broader audience to have, those Q&As. We also have obviously the FAR, we have the Interact community. That's the best place to stay informed about future updates, announcements, and training opportunities as it relates to the MASS program. And as always, we have the MASS PMO at gsa.gov. So if you have questions related to the MASS program or ever need additional guidance, you can use that email address to get your questions answered. With that, Matt, that concludes the session on OLMs.